Let me introduce you to one of the proud supporters of From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Iowa floor covering down in Bondurant. Now, for the last year and a half, you've heard me talk about this great company in the heart of central Iowa. They've got their tough core, click together, 4.5 millimeter waterproof vinyl flooring, great for you DIYers out there. But even if you're just a contractor or you need a different type of flooring, they've got you covered, whether it be tile showers, carpet. Give Iowa Floor Covering a chance to serve you better and serve your flooring needs. Visit them online at iowafloorcovering.com. That's iowafloorcovering.com, or you can give them a call at 515-379-7000. That's 515-379-7000. Thank you to Iowa Floor Covering in Bondurant. We are appreciative of Iowa Floor Covering for being with us here on a Saturday afternoon in late January, as I'm joined by none other than Coach Don Patterson here From the Hawkeye of the Storm for a special edition of Hawkeye Hangout preceding the big national title game on Monday. Don, you're looking good. You staying warm on this cold January afternoon?
I'm not planning on going outside. You're right about that.
Well, folks, we planned this very carefully. We've got NFL football. I know a lot of Chiefs fans in the state of Iowa. The Chiefs will be playing here in a couple hours, and then the Detroit Lions. I know a lot of Hawkeye fans have turned into Lions fans, what with the additions of guys like Jack Campbell and certainly Sam Laporta. So we're here for the next hour to 2 hours, potentially past the hour. We've got a goal in the live chat. If we can hit that, we'll continue, but we appreciate, Don, you taking the time. You're always a man with a wealth of knowledge, especially as it relates to numbers. And so I'm intrigued to get kind of a sneak preview on this big game on Monday between Notre Dame and the Big Ten's representative, the Ohio State Buckeyes, an opportunity for the Big Ten Conference to lay its mark with a national title, which it, of course, has not done since, 2015? Am I right in saying that? Was it 2015? Was that the Cardale Jones Ohio State team? Or was that 17?
That sounds about right, Corey, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
it's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. And the Big Ten has played second fiddle to the SEC. We've had conversations with Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, here over the past few weeks. And you got to kind of crunch the numbers collectively. I'm anxious to get your take on that debate. But certainly this game will have an impact on that narrative. And so we'll look forward to chatting about Ohio State and Notre Dame here in just a few minutes. But there is some news that basically broke here in the last 10 days that we have not been able to talk with you about on the air, Don. Last time we were live on a show together, we talked about Iowa's edition of South Dakota State transfer quarterback Mark Gronowski. And Iowa has since announced his signing, while also noting that the former Jackrabbit and Chicago native will miss spring practice due to a surgery and is not expected to return to Iowa, or I should say to competition, until June for summer workouts in June. So I guess part one of this, I've talked about it at length. I want you to give me your reaction to this news when you first heard it, and how big of a concern, if any, should this be to Hawkeye fans that feel let down after what they perceive to be a major victory in getting Mark Gronowski out of the portal.
Well, the good news, Corey, it's not a repair of a torn ACL. As I understand it, it's a repair to his right shoulder. That's a concern, of course, because he's right-handed. So I don't really know. It's got to be a pretty simple procedure, I would think. But regardless of that, obviously it takes time to recover, especially if it's your throwing shoulder. And I have great faith in our doctors. I know our team physician really well. His dad's a golfing buddy of mine. He's in his 80s. He can still beat me. But Dr. Wolf's a wonderful doctor. And if he does the surgery, I'm presuming he will, then he's in the best of hands. Certainly a physician that's very, very good at what he does. So I have every reason to believe it's true that he will be full go come June. And that's early enough. But what can happen here in the spring, what we call mental reps, he's going to be standing behind the huddle. Behind the line of scrimmage at all times. So when the quarterback is in position to throw, he's going to be looking over his shoulder effectively and seeing a lot of what the quarterback is seeing too. And so those are the mental reps I'm always referring to. You can still make your own judgment. Even if you don't have a ball in your hand and you're not in position to throw, you can still make a judgment as to what you would do at that moment with the football. So it's still a learning process for all those quarterbacks that are absorbing the one guy that's got the ball in his hands. And Mark has made really good decisions. He's, of course, got a wealth of experience. I have done one of his games for TV. A couple of years ago, I did a game. I was impressed with him then for how he played. He's played on a big stage, and I'll say it this way, Corey. People might say, well, he's never even played in a huge stadium. That's not true. Of course, he's played in some big stadiums, one of which is Kinnick, as you know. I'll let you elaborate on that game at some point. But the bottom line, I'll say it this way, Corey. When I first went to Western Illinois, I told those guys, I cannot help, because they knew my background. I said, I cannot help you get to the Rose Bowl. But if we ever get to Chattanooga, you're going to think it's the Rose Bowl. I was making a reference, of course, to the national championship game at that time in Chattanooga. And I believe that with all my heart. There's no bigger stage than playing on national TV for a national championship. And as you know, South Dakota State has won 2 of them out of the last 3 years. And Mark was at the controls of one of those 2, I guess. I guess they lost 3 years ago. Is that right?
Right.
They won the last 2.
They lost this year.
Yeah, they lost this year. They won the previous two, I should say.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
And they got real close. They got real close his first year, his true freshman year, that spring season. Had he not gone down, I know he got hurt against Sam Houston State in the playoffs, but they were good. I mean, this has been 1A and 1B between the Bison and the Jackrabbits here for the last half decade at least.
Yeah, and as some of our listeners know, North Dakota State eliminated South Dakota State this year in the playoffs, in the semis, as I recall. And that game is played in Fargo. And the reason I bring it up that way, one of my all-time favorite wins as a head coach was in Fargo, North Dakota, because I think you can count the wins by the opposing team in that dome probably on both hands. I'm talking about over a 20-year span, maybe on both hands. That's how infrequently they lose at home. And North Dakota State had a wonderful team this year, too. That's a game you might recall that wasn't a tight, hard-fought game. I believe it was a one-score game, 28-21, as I recall. And, yeah, Mark played well in that game, too, as you would expect. I'm just excited about the fact that he's been on a big stage. He's played with a lot of poise. And he's very unlikely to get you beat. You always hear me say, well, the first thing a quarterback has to do is not get you beat. And then beyond that, of course, if he can be a difference maker for your own offense, that's even better. But at the very least, he's got to be sure that he's not a liability to you as a team. And I'm confident in saying Mark Gronowski will not be a liability for Iowa football. And for that matter, I have reason to believe that Brendan Sullivan will not be a liability either if he's in there. And we can discuss Brendan, but my quick comment about the bowl game, I think for 3 quarters, Brendan played really well. And in the fourth quarter, not as well. So he's still got to be able, he hadn't had that many opportunities to play when the game's on the line. And of course, it takes a little bit of time to be able to be so composed that you've heard me talk about Chuck Long, the fact that if the game came down to one play, his pulse rate went up about that much, not much. And that's the kind of guy you want taking snaps. And Gronowski's that kind of guy. I'm confident in saying that.
Don, with him missing spring, one of the things that I had said during this portal process over the last, 35, 40 days, well, now I guess we're getting closer to probably 50 or 60 days. Once this season wound down and we started thinking about portal prospects and recruiting and all that, I thought how important it was that Iowa get somebody there for the spring, because not only are you, Brendan Sullivan, you look at a guy like Brendan Sullivan, this is going to be his first spring. We saw them bring him in the summer, brought in Jacob Gill and Brendan Sullivan in the summer, and he filled in admirably for Cade McNamara went down. I was an advocate for Brendan being the starter down the stretch of the season, but you do wonder, had he gotten there earlier and had a full spring with his teammates, what a difference it might have made. And now we won't know with Mark if he was able to get reps during the spring. I understand what you're saying. He's still going to be there, right? He's still going to be able to invest time and energy learning the offense, getting to know his teammates. So what is it during the spring, besides just reps with his receivers, with his center? What is it that's going to be missed the most by not having him in pads this spring?
I think the very thing you just mentioned, repetitions with the receivers that are going to be on the other end of the ball in the fall. Timing is so critical. Some people have observed, even when we connect on passes, it's not effortless. It looks like we're always trying to just find a way to throw and catch the ball, and we don't necessarily hit our receiver in full stride. And he doesn't have as much of a chance to run out with the ball, those kind of things. There's some truth to that. That's why that timing is so critical. You've heard me talk about a few of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and honest to God, their accuracy is so good, Corey. If the optimum place for the football is in one location, typically the ball shows up within a foot of that location. That's how good these guys are. I'm talking about the best ones. And we can debate who the best ones are, but we come up with a lot of the same names, that's for sure. Aaron Rodgers, in terms of location on throws and ability to make throws, is about as good as he gets. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, those guys in particular. Our guy with the Ravens does have good ability in that regard. Not to mention, of course, he's off the charts good in terms of extending plays. And you've heard us talk about.
How about an underrated guy in C.J. Stroud, who will be playing the Chiefs here this afternoon? He's had an unbelievable start to his NFL career.
Very true. So many of them nowadays, they have that element of being able to extend plays. You don't see too many traditional pocket passers that are even considered among the best in the NFL. The typical best of the best is a guy that also has running ability. Whether it be, I can't think of the guy's name from the Ravens. What's his name again?
Lamar Jackson,
Josh Allen, of course. Mahomes is above average as a runner. And most of them are. They have some escapability.
Let me ask you this, to piggyback on that response and the lack of reps he's going to get with his receivers during the spring. If you're in this, and I know it's hard because you were recruiting during a period that it's not that there wasn't money floating around from the bigger programs going down to recruits and that there wasn't dirty laundry and that type of thing. But now NIL rules the roost, so to speak, literally. And so it's very well known that Mark Gronowski is getting paid a good sum of money to come to Iowa. That's very out in the open. So my question to you, Don, is assuming Iowa knew about all of this, and we can only assume that, right? We assume Kirk and the staff, they were fully aware of this injury and this surgery prior to offering him whatever they offered him through the collective and bringing him in, right? Is that fair to say that
I don't know that for a fact. I would be surprised if that were not the case.
Okay, so we assume that. My question to you is, if you're the head coach and you're primarily the one making the decisions from the financial side of things as well, you have a set amount that you can divvy out to players that are on your roster currently, the players you're trying to bring in. Does Mark Gronowski missing spring practice, but being with the team still, learning the offense, etc., and only having one season to play, does that devalue him at all in your eyes? If you're recruiting him, does that make him worth less monetarily?
Well, I'll say it this way. If I knew all that, I might be giving pause to the idea that we need to pay him a huge sum of money. Maybe a lesser sum, but, it's no different than buying a car. You don't mind paying a fair price for a car, but you certainly don't want to feel that you're paying more for the car than what it's worth.
Right. Yeah, if I give you an illustration, folks, if I'm a guy who's traveling a lot and I sign a contract for a car, but I find out it's not going to be available for 3 months. I mean, that doesn't mean the car itself is worth less money, but it's worth less to me because I don't have access to it until 3 months down the road.
I think the good news, Corey, I know Kirk has stated even, and Kirk wouldn't say it if he didn't have great confidence it was all true, stated he should be good to go in June. So you've got June and July. That's a lot of time. There's a lot of balls thrown and caught in June and July. And so the receivers and the quarterbacks have a chance to get to know each other really, really well, to be able to recognize how different receivers run the same route, be able to fine-tune their throwing and catching to a large degree. And then, of course, comes camp itself in August. And then the pads go on, and it's a little bit different to throw and catch with pads than without pads. And then last but not least, of course, there's the preseason. Our first 3 games are non-conference. One of them's a huge challenge, of course. That's in Ames. The other 2 are all but gimmies. So the good news, even if we don't have things like we want them come September 1st, the month of September is still available to us to get right for the conference season. And the conference season, of course, doesn't start until late September, early October.
One more note on the injury. It won't be a surprise to anybody watching this that I did not play high major college football. However, the one semi-serious surgery that I've underwent since my adulthood was a labrum repair. And word on the street is that's what Mark Gronowski is having done. I see it in the chat. T. Hink, I've not had a conversation with Mark about his injury, but that's the word on the street that he's getting a labrum repair. I can tell you my experience having not had the assets available that a Big Ten program like Iowa has medically, right? My shoulder's never been the same. It just hasn't. So, I'm not saying he's going to get the therapy.
State this, Corey. If you go into the knife, there's no guarantee for the outcome.
Yeah, and I'm not saying anything against the doctors that did my surgery. I'm not saying it was unsuccessful. I'm just, it's not the same. I don't have the arm strength. Literally throwing a football, I have a much weaker arm than I used to. Now I'm not playing high major college football. These guys, Mark's going to have the best staff, the best therapy, all of that. I'm not saying it, and it happens. Guys get labrum repairs and they're fine. I'm just saying from my own personal experience. Do you have any experiences you can remember of a quarterback during your coaching career that had maybe not rotator cuff, but labrum specifically repaired? Can you recall anybody off the top of your head?
Honestly, I feel blessed. I can't recall a single one. Now, maybe there was one, and if there was, it was certainly with a lot of months available to us before the competition started up again. At the end of the season, rather than sometime in the new calendar year, a little bit later. I don't even know when this surgery will be accomplished. I assume it'll be done on campus, but I don't know that either. I would hope it would be done here.
For the record, and it may have already been done, but for the record, the release from Kirk Ferentz officially stated that he played last season with a common football-related injury. That was the release. Nothing specifically about labrum, so I'm kind of assuming based on the chatter out there on social media, and I saw it was commented on in the chat, if that's the injury. I know, again, my own experience, not college football level experience, but my own experience with a torn labrum is I lived for years with a torn labrum. I was not competing at that level. I did compete. I still golfed. I could play pickup basketball. I could throw a football, play flag football. I could do all those things. And it wasn't until after the surgery now that I really can't throw a football. It was one of those things that it was, when I had a torn labrum, Don, it was very easy for my shoulder basically to come out, dislocate. And it
was your throwing shoulder too?
My throwing shoulder. And it would happen playing basketball. I had it happen playing golf. I had it happen doing everything. I had it happening tying my shoulder was so loose in my socket that it came out tying my shoe. That's how loose it was because that labrum was torn. My point is, it's not that I didn't lose strength until after my surgery. And I'm sure everybody's different. Everybody's going to heal differently and recover differently.
A question related to that, Corey. How many years ago was that surgery?
That was 2021.
Okay, not that long ago.
22.
I was hoping it was further back in time. The thought being, of course, that medicine makes improvements with each and every year too, even if only by a small amount.
But I certainly don't want to downplay the level of recovery, therapy, and all that he's going to have at his disposal. And he has a lot more reason to work as hard as he can. Not that I didn't work hard on my therapy, but, I think there is the old adage, Don, that you get what you put into something. And often that's the case with repairs and therapy, physical therapy, recovery from something like this. And so it's an unfair comparison. I just bring it up because I can sort of relate to the injury. And I just know I could throw a football really far, even with the torn labrum. But once they sewed that back together, so to speak, then you're just trying to get that mobility and that strength back. And I've heard different. I know someone who played high school football here in this county who was a really good high school. He wasn't good enough to play college ball, but he had the same repair done, and he has the same response now. Like, he can't throw a football, and he played option quarterback in high school. He can't throw a football nearly like he did prior to surgery. So it's interesting. We'll hope to have Mark Gronowski on this show at some point. Maybe he can. I don't know how open he's going to be about this, but the bottom line is Iowa expects him to be back in June, and it is good to have him with the team learning the offense over the next few months. We'll come back to this, folks. If you have a question for Coach Patterson or myself, feel free to call in. The phone line's open. Also, StreamYard, you can connect via StreamYard. The link is in the description of the video. The phone line is 515-635-1601. 515-635-1601. Brian Bourne with a super chat. Thank you, Brian. He says, thank you for all you guys do. Living in Ohio, being Iowa fans, it's great to be able to tune in for reliable insight and information. Go Hawks. Appreciate that, Brian. Always good. I know Coach Patterson, I can speak for both of us, that we always appreciate hearing from people all over the U.S., all over the world that enjoy the show and maybe feel a little disconnected until they tune into the old YouTube channel. So we appreciate the super chat, Brian, and your response, your feedback, your support. Let's go to our first caller of the day, and our only caller so far. Mr. Tony Schneider is with us. Tony,
it's just
from
I got. Yep, I was gonna say I found the hat. You gave me crap last night.
Did you sleep at all last night after what Iowa basketball did? Did you sleep at all?
Slept like a baby.
Did you dream about Iowa hoops?
Actually, I didn't. Not 1 second, honestly.
I like how you said that. Actually, I didn't. Like, it's almost odd that you didn't. You
yeah, probably to some people, probably is odd that I did. I just had one real quick question.
Yes,
for Don. I know you follow the basketball team, and you probably saw what happened last night. I want to know, from a coach and an administrative standpoint, how often do in-season conversations happen? Do you hear the rumors and scuttlebutt, I'm sure, or do you just block it out? And what would that look like from a team that's having the lack of success, quote unquote, that the men's team is having? How does that look like from a coach and administrative standpoint, and what conversations go on? That's all I had. Log off. I'll listen to the show. Great job, guys. Enjoy the College Football National Championship on Monday. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Well, my guess is if any team's experiencing adversity, excuse me, one of the things the coach would do is remind his players, do us all a favor, don't bother to read what's getting printed right now about this team. There's nothing to be gained from it, and you know much more about this team than any of those people that are writing about it. I would imagine our players have heard that. They need to trust in their teammates, trust in their coaches, and just keep their head down and keep working and do not pay attention to what might be written and what might be said. That's the best advice I can give them. It was painful to watch. I didn't watch it in real time. I was taping the game. I knew I was going to watch it late. So when we were done with our movie that we were watching, I flipped over before the game had ended. And of course, I was disappointed and surprised when I saw the score. And it was obvious that the game had been settled for a long time. But today I did go back and look at the entire game. And it's distressing to see us struggle to that extent, Corey. It's hard to imagine. How can we beat Indiana by 25 and turn around and be down 33 at the half to a UCLA team that's been very up and down? They were 2-4 going in, as I recall, in the conference, right?
I was going to say more down than up in the conference play.
Yeah. It's disheartening to observe that. And I don't pretend to be an expert on basketball. The things that are obvious that show up, oh my gosh, we were outnumbered, I believe, 4-1 last I saw. Points in the paint was 4-1. I think 24 versus 6, something like that. Turnovers were 2-1.
Don, I ran through this stat yesterday, but of UCLA's 94 points, 82 of them came in the paint, from three, or at the free throw line. Now think about that. That means you're not forcing anything from a difficult place on the floor, because almost all those threes they took, not all of them, but most of them were good looks. And they didn't even shoot the three ball that well. Like, if they shot the three ball halfway decent, they're easily over 100. They had 57 at halftime. And when you make your first 10 shots from the field or whatever it was, something ridiculous like that, what I'm concerned about, Don, not to turn this into a basketball show, I do appreciate the comment from Tony, and he's a huge basketball junkie. What concerns me is the fact that what happened against Wisconsin basically happened again and then happened again. I mean, I know that sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, but one would think from the outside looking in, with a team as talented as Iowa, and they are talented. These are Big Ten basketball players. Yes, they're going up against great talent as well. But one would think that they would say, after giving up 116 to Wisconsin, historically bad defensive performance, that they would put their foot down and say, we're never letting that happen again. That will never, ever happen again. And instead of that happening, Don, it happened the very next road game and the very next road game after that. So
yeah, I'm aware, of course, we haven't won a road game yet.
Right.
That's distressing. I mean, let's face it, you play half your conference games on the road, and it's unrealistic to think you're going to win them all, but my gosh, you better win your fair share. A lot of people would say win all your home games and win half your road games, and you'll have a high seed in the tournament. Easier said than done, I'll admit. But my gosh, it's distressing that we don't really look like we're competing very well. The first 9 shots, as you know, went in for UCLA, but my gosh, so many of them were just throwdowns. I mean, they were balls thrown up around the basket, and they just reached under the ball and threw it on through, you know.
And that banner stat that we had there a few minutes ago, 82 of their 94 points scored from 3 free throw line or paint. The ones that were in the paint were not just in the paint; they were at the rim. Like you said,
right.
most of those were layups and dunks. And Coach Coles always says, easy way to tell if you're playing good defense, how many of the other team's points are layups, dunks, and threes. And if almost all of them are layups, dunks, and threes, your defense ain't doing its job, because you got to be forcing the opponent to take tough twos and contested threes. And the part of the problem is Iowa allows dribble penetration. They're not real big and strong, nor have they been very big and strong under Fran. They've lacked. I felt like they've lacked girth. Even their better defensive teams, like the Woodbury era, when you go up against these bigger, stronger Ohio State, Michigan State teams, they got bullied down low. I think we're seeing that again right now. The Sanfords aren't very strong underneath. They're long. They can sort of rebound the ball well, but they don't have a great interior presence. Laji Dembele is not a presence for them inside. They're trying to get Seydou Traore going because his physicality and his ability, his athleticism is off the charts. But you got to rein it in. You've got to figure out a way to channel that. Right. And they're not doing that right now. And he's a disaster on the offensive end, as is Evan Bronze, as is Riley Mulvey. So,
and then another concern is our point guards turn the ball over a lot. And that hadn't been happening.
Right. Yeah. Yesterday was not the best day for Brock or Drew, and Drew had been playing really well. Really, the only guy that showed up yesterday was Josh Dix, and he was phenomenal. I thought he was really good from start to finish. It's amazing you can say that about a team that played so badly, but he was so good. And I've said it before. I think he's their best team. Or, excuse me, their best player. I think he's their best player.
It was amazing. You know how I'm with numbers, Corey. In the first half, during the timeout, I projected that they continue the way they're going. They would have scored 140 points.
Right.
I mean, they backed off, if you will.
They let off the gas.
Yeah.
I mean, they just did. And they still won by, 24? So, anyways, good question from Tony. Kelly, thank you for reminding everybody, hit the like button, hit the thumbs up button if you're here. Good thing to do at the outset so you don't forget. Let's move to our other topic here. We're going to discuss the national championship game shortly, but T. Hink brings up in the chat the addition of Sam Phillips. The last time we were on the air together, we talked about Sam Phillips, the Chattanooga transfer, but had not yet committed to Iowa. He had been scheduled for a visit to USC, never took that visit, had opportunities to go to several different schools, including Virginia Tech, also had reported offers from Memphis. Like I said, USC, Cal, FAU. He's undersized. Okay. I think that probably scares some schools off. His production really can't be denied. He's had about 2,100 career receiving yards, 153 career receptions, 9 touchdowns. He was an FCS freshman All-American by Phil Steele back in 2022. He was first team All SoCon in 24. His wide receivers coach was quoted as saying that he was their fastest guy on the team, even though he doesn't necessarily look that fast when you watch him run. He's kind of like Caleb Johnson. He's got that deceptive speed in a different way because Caleb was the long strider. That's not what Sam Phillips is at 5'9". But appears to have really good hands. I haven't went back and studied all of his tape this past season, but there's scuttle out there that he didn't have a single drop this year. You and I both said, hey, if we watched the tape, we'd probably find a drop or two. But even just suggesting that is an indicator that he's got pretty sure hands. We see him on tape making one-handed grabs. In addition to making guys miss once he catches the ball. He's got 1 year left. He had no high major offers out of high school. His only offers that I could find out of high school were from Mount St. Joseph University, Huntingdon College, and Reinhardt. He had a preferred walk-on opportunity with the Mocs. He took it, eventually earned a scholarship. He's from Cartersville, Georgia, and is actually a really good 6A high school in Cartersville. And so just flew under the radar. I mean, obviously had a lot of talent around him. But based on what you've seen, heard, the size, the production, your thoughts on Iowa landing a really productive FCS receiver in Sam Phillips?
I'll confess, Corey, that I haven't studied the video on Sam. I'm assuming if I look hard enough, I can certainly find it on social media, and I will do that, but I haven't done it yet. But I have read a lot about his success. One of the things I like about him, he appears to have really good consistency. He's done it for the last 3 years. And the other thing that's encouraging to me, I think a lot of short passes have turned into long gains. He has what we call, I'm pretty sure without seeing him, based on his height alone, probably got really good short space quickness. In other words, his legs aren't that long, of course, compared to some other players. And he's got, I'm sure, an above average ability to change direction and make the first guy miss. And let's face it, we need a lot of that because not everybody's built like Caleb Johnson. You know, not everybody can be a long strider and simply outrun people down the field. So there's two ways to turn a short gain into a big gain. One is by having great top end speed, but maybe more important is short space quickness. And I believe he does have that. And he does have a capacity to catch the ball, make the first guy miss. And that excites me because he's been productive for 3 long years now. And I got a feeling if we give him half a chance, he'll be productive all over again for us.
Why is size overrated to you at receiver?
Well, people always talk about the 50-50 balls, but let's face it, the easier ball to throw and catch is simply a ball thrown that's not in the air very long. You know, the kind of throws we make on nakeds, slants, simple out routes, sprint passes, things like that. And let's not forget about fly sweeps, things like that. Hard to believe he wouldn't be a decent runner on a fly sweep. We're going to find out, I hope. I'm sure we'll find out because Tim's going to investigate what he can do and do well. And those things he's good at, you can bet that we're going to give him a chance to do them.
After he committed, I think it was during one of our shows with Mark on a Tuesday afternoon, some of the response from fans, and I think maybe even Mark stated this, is he feels like you still need somebody out there with size, somebody in your top 3 that can give you size, whether that mean 6'2", 6'3", 6'1" with a long wingspan. Is that a fair estimation for you at the Big Ten level, Don? I mean, because right now, I would think you would agree, the top 2 appear to be Sam Phillips has got to be in their top 3, I think, based on them bringing him in for 1 year. He's in your top 3, and Jacob Gill has got to be one of your top 3. Neither one of those guys has great size. So right. Do you need, could Seth Anderson at 6'1" potentially be that third guy? Does that mean that Caden Weegan or Terrell Washington, because they're undersized, they're not going to be in the top 3? Does it have to be?
Don't forget about another guy that's tall by the name of Reese Vanderzee.
I was going to say Reese Vanderzee, Dayton Howard, Jarrett Bowie. They do have guys with length. But my question is, are we to assume that the top 3 receivers, you're not going to have 3 guys on the field at the same time at receiver of, Caden Weegan, Sam Phillips, Jacob Gill. I mean,
Well,
Matt, scheme-wise, does that work?
So much of the time, of course, we do have three wideouts out there on the field. And I'd like to think at all times one of them would be one of those tall receivers that are ideal for 50-50 balls. 2 out of 3 can be the undersized guys because of speed and quickness. But one of them needs to be a tall receiver, if not 2.
So it's intriguing to me because you're going to run more than 3 guys, and injuries are also going to happen. But Caden Weegan comes back for another year. Don, I think you and I both, given what he just won the Return Specialist of the Year award. That's something we haven't talked about. What an unbelievable performance he had from start to finish this year on special teams, coming in to replace an historic guy in Cooper DeJean. And what does Caden Weegan do? He ends up being the best return specialist in the country. But with him coming back for one more year, you would almost hope that they are able to involve him more on offense. So I don't know if you have thoughts to what that looks like, but like I say, you'd have to think Sam Phillips and Jacob Gill are at the top of the pecking order right now based on returning production, albeit Sam Phillips not at Iowa. How does Caden Weegan fit into the mold? And then Reese Vanderzee, he flashed early. Is that a good problem to have? Just competition everywhere and things will sort themselves out by fall camp?
I think it is a good problem to have, Corey. At least we have some pieces that might solve the puzzle. Different types of pieces. We have some bigger, tall receivers that can high point the ball. We have other guys that can maybe be a little better at making someone miss. A lot of options, I think, and it's not hard to imagine, Corey, if we have what you would define as, let's just pick a number, let's say at least 6 good options. Not hard to imagine that 3 of them might come through in a great way. And those are going to be the 3 that play the most of the time, whoever they are. And maybe someone else is not in that equation simply because of a minor injury. But at least we have some options open to us to solve the puzzle.
Absolutely. And like I said, if you're looking at guys that have size with the current roster, assuming they don't add anybody else in receiver, and I don't think they probably do. I don't think they probably will. But I mentioned Jarrett Bowie, Dayton Howard, kid native from Kansas City native who's listed at 6'4", 6'5", and probably Reese Vanderzee would be the only other guy. Alex Mota's maybe 6 foot. Seth Anderson's maybe 6'1". So I think those 3 are the only ones that fit that traditional X mold, if you will. So yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting. And as you know, Don, less receiver depth purely from a numbers standpoint now, because let's be honest, especially during the Bryan era when that position struggled to produce game after game, there were walk-ons that consistently played, whether that be Alec Wick or Reese Osgood, Jack Johnson. I mean, we can go down the list, and now all those walk-ons, basically all of them, they're off to FCS schools and smaller schools to in many cases be on scholarship, but they don't have homes here because of the new roster limits. So this should be healthy competition, but it will be interesting to see how much Lester can develop the room along with John Budmeyer during this offseason. Okay, is there something else before we get to... Yes, Willie wanted us to look at... I don't know that we've done this. I've done it with Mark, but Willie wants us to look at the Iowa football schedule. And he says it looks like 3 losses right away. Your thoughts on the schedule. So while we're talking about it, we might as well pull up the schedule. I'll share my screen here so we can look at this. Don, you talked us through the month of September. Let me pull up... And based on I am looking at the roster, by the way, right now. It looks like Alec Wick is still technically on scholarship, or excuse me, is still on the roster based on I lose track of all the guys that have announced they're leaving. I know Osgood left and a couple others left as well. But based on the roster, Alec Wick is still with Iowa at the moment, Don. All right. Let me pull up 2015, 2016 for everybody. And I will share my screen. Of course, Iowa opening with Albany. What do you know about the Danes, Don? You ever played the Danes? Did you play the Danes while you were at Western ever?
No.
Why? Why not? Why didn't you play the Danes?
They weren't going to sign up for a home and home with West Illinois, I promise you.
Well, why are they signing up with a home and home? Well, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not a home and home versus Iowa. it's a bye game. All right, so here's the look at the schedule. We start at the top. We'll probably do this exercise several times here in the next 9 months, next 7-8 months. Albany on the 30th of September, or excuse me, 30th of August, and then yes, that daunting trip to Ames. And I don't really know exactly what the Cyclones will look like, but man, they've done good work in the portal again. They seem to do good work in the portal every year. It's been interesting to hear some of the chatter about Matt Campbell, and at this point, I don't expect him to end up anywhere. Is he kind of leveraging for more money? We'll see. But he's certainly gaining some NFL interest and some high major interest other places as well. So we'll have to wait and see how all that shakes out. But certainly that trip to Ames is daunting. But Iowa should be 2-1 heading into the latter part of the month, Don.
Correct. At the very worst, they should be 2-1.
UMass is, I don't know what they've done here the last 3 years, but in the last 10 years, they've been known as one of the worst FBS programs out there.
I don't believe that's changed.
You know what has changed? Your old UConn Huskies are a bit better than they were for a while.
Yes, they are.
And that's credit to Mora, right?
I think so. I think he's done a good job. I watched them in their bowl game. They were pretty impressive.
Yeah. They were better this year. Rutgers in Piscataway. That should be an interesting way to open Big Ten play, Don. Rutgers exceeded my expectations in their bowl game as well. They scored a number of points, did they not? I'm trying to we have 40-some bowl games to track it. I almost forget what each team did, but
yeah,
what did Rutgers do in their bowl game?
My thought about Charlotte's teams in general, you've heard me say this before, they do a good job of not beating themselves.
Right.
I would expect that to continue.
They scored.
So in that regard, it could be a difficult game.
Don, Rutgers is under Schiano has traditionally been a defensive-minded program since he took over there in return. Right. And they put up 41. Now, it was against Kansas State. Kansas State put up 44 and won the Rate Bowl. But that's a pretty big number. I'll be interested to see. And they do, if I'm not mistaken, they do return Cal McManus. Am I right in saying that? The former Minnesota.
I'm not sure if he has another year or not.
I'm pretty sure he does. But assuming he does, that's a difficult Big Ten opener, Don, to travel 2 time zones off to the East Coast and play what might be not a sleeper in the conference per se, but especially with Cal McManus. Well, let's see. He's listed as a senior, so I don't know if he's got another year or not. If he's got an extra, we'll have to look into that. But they've obviously been really good on the ground. Kyle Monungai, but I believe he is gone. He was one of the Big Ten leading rushers. I think he was right behind Caleb Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless of what that team looks like, that's a tricky trip out east. And then what does Indiana look like with Kurt Cignetti and what he did for the Hoosiers this year? They lost 2 games to the 2 teams that are in the national title. National title game, Don. They lost Ohio State and to Notre Dame. Now, thankfully, that game is at home. It's homecoming. I think it's homecoming, right? It's their first game. I'm assuming that's the homecoming date. I guess that hasn't officially been announced yet, but
I don't know.
That's on September 27th, and then at Wisconsin after a bye week, which Iowa's done a few years back. I remember Iowa lost to Purdue, had a bye week, trip to Wisconsin, and we thought, hey, they're going to be ready to go, and they got blasted in Madison. That's a tough place to play, although Wisconsin has struggled since Fickell took over, and the last time they went up to Madison, they won.
Let's not forget last fall we had a bye week before Ohio State, too.
Yeah, and that didn't work real well.
That didn't work either.
So I guess first glance, Don, those are your 6 games. What should Iowa's record be after 6 games, based on what we know right now?
Well, it's not hard to imagine that it might be 3-3.
You think that's what it will be, or should be, or?
No, I'd like to believe we could be at least 4-2. Ames is the toughest assignment, I think. But let's face it, all 3 of those you have on the screen now, none of those are anywhere near gimmies. I mean, they're all going to be a struggle.
I think Iowa should beat Indiana at home.
I'd like to think so. You got to believe Indiana has lost quite a few players, but here's the truth: even if they graduated a lot, but do you think Signetti might not be able to attract some more guys to transfer in?
Yeah,
I suspect he would, based on their first year success.
Yeah, I mean, if they're any worse than, what did we say, 4-2, I think massive disappointment. And I'm not saying the wheels come off at that point, because the schedule doesn't really get easier after that. Because having those three of your first 4 big time games are on the road. Think about that, Don. At Rutgers, at Wisconsin, at Iowa State. Your only home games to that point are Albany, UMass, and Indiana. Three of your first 4 big ones are on the road. So difficult stretch there. And then it doesn't get any easier. You get 3 games in a row at home. I didn't realize this before looking at the schedule just now. They get 3 games in a row at home. Penn State, Minnesota, and Oregon.
I mean, you have a bye in between Minnesota and Oregon, I see.
Right.
But you're right. It's an odd schedule to have 3 consecutive home games.
And then at USC and home against Michigan State, followed by at Nebraska. Of course, Iowa went to LA this year, and it didn't go so well. And that's a hard USC team to judge, because I think you and I both expected them to be upper echelon of the Big Ten, and they squeaked into a bowl game. I think they won. Didn't they come back and beat A&M in their bowl game? But I
believe they did. And both teams mismanaged the clock too. But anyway, I do remember that from the bowl game.
My guess is that the odds makers will have Iowa's over under preseason be about 6.5. And I'm not telling people to buy into that, but based on the last couple of seasons where Iowa's over under preseason was 7.5, I don't know how you don't at least knock 1 win off. Is 6.5 a good number?
Well, comparing this schedule to last year's schedule, Corey, last year, as you know, immediately before the season started, we were actually listed as a favorite in most people's eyes at 11 out of 12 games. The only exception being the trip to Ohio State. This year, the schedule's tougher. It's not hard to imagine that 5 teams aren't going to start off in the top 25.
Right. Yeah.
You pick them. Which 5 would you pick? Because you actually got a choice or two as to who that 5th team might be.
In the Big Ten?
The
top 5 teams in the Big Ten?
No, just of our schedule, which 5 do you think might end up in the top 25?
Well, I mean, I would expect USC to be there because of the brand. I would expect Iowa State to be there. I would expect Indiana to be there based on what those 2 teams did this year. I don't know how Iowa State's going to return Rocco, and they're going to return, they lose some at receiver, but they bring in, again, a good transfer portal class. I think they'll be better on defense. They return John Haycock, who's the lifeblood of that program. So I would expect those 2 teams to definitely be ranked. And again, USC, Penn State's going to be ranked. Oregon's going to be ranked. That's 5. And then I don't expect Nebraska to be ranked. Don't expect Michigan State to be ranked. Don't expect Minnesota to be ranked. Don't expect Rutgers to be ranked. But all those teams, like Rutgers was a bowl team this year. Minnesota was a bowl team, won their bowl game. USC was a bowl team. Michigan State beat Iowa last year. Nebraska was a bowl team this year. So, there's, I think, at least 4 surefire top 25 teams preseason in Indiana, Iowa State, Penn State, and Oregon. I think USC is likely. And then, there's a few other teams that were, 6 to 8 win teams this year that, depending on what they can do between now and the start of fall camp, recruiting wise and portal wise, who knows? They could have more than 5.
I think anyone and everyone, Corey, would say that this schedule is more daunting than last year's schedule.
Yeah.
So a lot of fans would consider last year's season to be a lost opportunity. But this year, the opportunity is not quite so optimistic maybe as last year's. Tougher assignments in general.
Folks, we're here at least for the next 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to be talking about the national championship here coming up on Monday. If you have a question about college football, the playoff, the portal, or your Iowa Hawkeyes and the Iowa football team and the offseason that is, call us 515-635-1601, 515-635-1601. So last topic, assuming we don't get a flurry of super chats in here and or phone calls. Donna, we timed this so that we were a couple days out from the national title game. As I said at the outset, an opportunity for the Big Ten to get back on the map, so to speak, on the national map. Ohio State won the conference's last title behind an unbelievable playoff run from Cardale Jones and Ohio State team. By the way, that was 2015, now that I'm recalling it in my own mind, because they had lost to Virginia Tech earlier in the year, and a lot of people were writing them off. They dealt with injuries at quarterback. And, of course, that was an Urban Meyer-led team. We have not seen Ryan Day lead this team to the promised land. And a lot of people were right. Let's be honest, they were writing Ryan Day off after the loss to Michigan here about a month and a half ago. I was not writing him off, but I said it publicly. I said, if they lose to Tennessee in the playoff, I think he might be done.
Right.
And in hindsight, I can't believe I said that, but in reality that's how important that Michigan game is. If they win a national title, though, I still think I'd have to think that the sanity of the logical Ohio State fandom will still prevail and they will be happy. But this is an opportunity without question to get a big win for this conference. What can you tell us? I know you've ran tons of numbers, not just on Ohio State, but also on their opponent for this big title game on Monday night.
Right. Well, I took all 30 games. They've each played 15 games, all 30 games, and looked at them, 25 parameters in each game. So that's 750 independent evaluations, if you will. And even then, of course, once you've decided who won those parameters, you still got to figure out what it all means. And so when you combine all those games, all 30 of them, no games left out, here's what you come up with. Number one parameter in identifying the winning team is edge on rushing yardage. The team that outrushed the opponent in those 30 games won 27 times, lost 3. 90% win. 90% win. Ohio State was the team that outrushed the opponent in those 15 games, won 14 out of 15 times. In the case of Notre Dame, it was 13 out of 15 times. So 27 out of 30, 90% win. So outrushing your opponent in this game is very important. And then let's go down to number 2. Number 2 on the list is total offense, edge on total offense. That's not too shocking, realizing that both teams run the ball pretty well and throw the ball pretty well. Or in the case of Ohio State, better than just pretty well. If you had an edge on total offense, you won 26 times, lost 4. 26 and 4. 87% win. Now, just looking at those two parameters, Corey, then I asked the question, what if you did both? What if you outrushed the opponent and you had an edge on total offense? What's your record then? You want to guess? Your record is 24 and 1.
I was going to say 100% win. Close.
Close. And the obvious question is, what's the exception? You're going to find it interesting what the exception was. It was Louisville. Okay. Louisville versus Notre Dame.
Okay.
Matter of fact, you go back and look at the Louisville game, you wonder how in God's name Notre Dame won the game. Yeah. It wasn't a one-score game. It was 31-24. Louisville did have the ball late in the game with a chance to tie or go ahead, and they simply couldn't do it. So to Notre Dame's credit, now that was game 4. That was a long time ago. And those Notre Dame fans out there, if you think your team hadn't improved a lot since September, think about this. Game 2, of course, was the unexplainable loss to Northern Illinois. Well, if you look at that game, Northern Illinois won 7 of the top 11 parameters. Notre Dame only won 4. If you looked at all 25, Northern Illinois won 16. Notre Dame only won 7. So it was not a fluke win. Northern Illinois deserved to win the game. That's hard to imagine, realizing that Notre Dame is not the same team now that they were in September. And 2 weeks later, or 2 games later at least, same with Louisville, but at least then they figured out how to avoid it. Believe it or not, Notre Dame only won 3 of the top 11 parameters. Louisville won 7. There was 1 tie. So hard to imagine that Notre Dame could win the game when they really didn't deserve to win it. You could say this, I guess Northern didn't deserve to win it and they lost it. Well, based on parameters, they didn't deserve to beat Louisville either, but they found a way to win the Louisville game. And obviously in October and November, especially in November and December, they're a much improved football team from what they were. So credit to the Notre Dame players and the coaches for finding a way. You know what would be interesting, Corey, is go back and look at the starting lineup versus Northern Illinois and see how many of those guys actually lost their jobs. Now, here's another reason I can explain the Northern Illinois fiasco. Do you recall what happened in Notre Dame's #1 game in the year? They went to Texas A&M and won.
Right.
That would have to be classified as a good win.
Close win, right? It was a close game.
I think it was a pretty close game, as I recall. But they won at College Station.
Yeah.
That's a good win. So here they are with Northern Illinois coming to town. And Notre Dame's got a bunch of guys that are barely out in their 20s also. And I'm sure they thought, we just got to show up and roll our helmets out there and we're going to win this game. Doesn't work that way. They learned a valuable lesson against Northern Illinois. And they took it to heart, and they haven't taken anybody for granted since, I don't believe.
We're going to get to this question from Sam before we finish up, but I do want to just confirm this. Ethan Kaliakmanis is eligible to return, and he has announced he is returning in 2025. That is a scary first Big Ten game. All right.
I think I saw a clip somewhere about any number of Penn State guys declaring to come back too. Now, don't quote me on that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was Penn State. Now, these are obviously not guys that are going to be drafted high,
right,
but guys that maybe have realized after testing the waters, we should come back.
And for the record, guys that, like, when we talk about schedule and projecting, it's January. There is a lot that can happen between now and then, but it is noteworthy to bring up a guy like Kaliakmanis who's coming back, because how many returning quarterbacks did Iowa see this year? Not that many, because guys are hopping around. I mean, Kaliakmanis is an excellent example. He's at Minnesota, then he crosses the conference and goes to Rutgers. Iowa State was one of the rare ones. Aiden Childs was a first-year guy at Michigan State. Curtis Rourke at Indiana, I wouldn't play them, but he was a first-year guy at Indiana. Will Howard is a first-year guy at Ohio State. Iowa's going to be playing Oregon. They're going to be with a different quarterback as Dylan Gabriel's run out of eligibility. You look at Penn State. They are going to get Drew Aller back. That's one of the few exceptions to that rule. But then you slide over to USC. No more Miller Moss. He transfers to Louisville. And who's the other one? Bronco Becht is back. Who's the other one I'm thinking of that returns their guy or doesn't return their guy, I should say. I don't know who I was thinking of. Well, Aiden Giles. Aiden Giles is going to be back. How about that? How about Iowa having to play? Why is that? Why are they playing Michigan State again?
I don't know. How crazy is it that you play 9 conference games and there are actually 17 opponents within your conference?
I guess I'm confused as to how. Maybe I need to go back and look at the formatting for schedules. But Iowa's going to play Nebraska, Minnesota, and Wisconsin every year. Those teams are locked in. So one would expect the other games to be, how would that work? You've got 6 other games every year.
Right.
They should be playing Michigan State again.
Right.
Who did they not play this year that they could have played that they're not playing again next year?
They're not playing Illinois in the year.
They could have played Purdue this year. Could have played Illinois next year. Could have played, they played Washington this year. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Purdue and Illinois are 2 right there.
There doesn't appear to be any kind of order in the scheduling.
Well, that's a strange one. I didn't even think about that until I'm glancing back through the schedule. But why they would play Michigan State for the second straight season makes very little sense to me. They're not playing Michigan. Could have played Michigan this year. So interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Calic Man is back. Earl Smith, former dual sport star Earl Smith, has passed away. And this was brought up in the chat. Now, Don, you are not old enough to have coached Earl Smith. But what do you know about Earl Smith? And back in, the 50s, early 50s, right? His claim to fame was being a track and football player at Iowa. And he was also a NCAA long jump champion in 53 and 54. What do you know about his legacy, if anything?
I do not know anything about him.
Okay. Right.
And that's hard to imagine. But let's face it now, the Evashevsky teams were prominent in the late 50s, but not in the early 50s.
Right. This is official release from the university, and I'm bringing this up because T. Hink in the chat brought it up. But he was a key cog in the Hawkeye football team's resurgence under Evashevsky. He was a 3-year letterman from 53 to 55, second team All-Big Ten in 54, led the Big Ten with 11 touchdowns and 66 points, also led the team in punt and kick return yardage in 54, had a 76-yard punt return against the Buckeyes in 54, ranks as the 14th longest in school history. He's a native of Gary, Indiana, led the team in punt return yards as a senior in 55, scored 2 touchdowns in his first game against Michigan in 53. He was a track and field champion at Iowa, indoor and outdoor long jump champion in 54, finished 4th in the NCAA long jump championships in both years. He returned home after Iowa to teach and coach high school sports back in Gary, I guess. 56-year career with Gary schools. Coached at several different schools during that stretch of time. He was the first African-American head coach at Froebel, Emerson, and Lew Wallace. His basketball teams won 323 games over 26 seasons, including 5 conference titles, 3 regional championships, and 2 trips to the tournament's Elite 8. He spent the last leg of his career as the citywide athletic director, retiring in 2013. He coached 5 high school All-Americans and 1 future NBA draft pick. Now think about this. This is a guy who played football and was a track star at Iowa, and he's over there coaching future All-Americans and NBA and first-round NBA draft picks, Don. 3-time Hall of Famer, being inducted into the Indiana Track Hall of Fame in 90, Indiana Football Hall of Fame in 2007, Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame in 2018. Now, how many people could you say are in 3 different sport Hall of Fames for their given state? Founder of the Gary Sports Hall of Fame, Smith was also a recipient of the IHSAA Ray Crow Award for Excellence in Leadership in 23. Multi-sport prep star in football, basketball, and track. At Roosevelt High School, he set the state long jump record and twice won the long jump state titles, while his team won the 51 and 52 track and field state championship. Memorial service is being held next Saturday in Gary. So thoughts go out to, condolences go out to the family of Earl Smith, but what a legacy he leaves behind, Don.
Think about this, Corey. And for all that accomplishment, he's got 1 athletic scholarship. We got excellence in several sports out of 1 scholarship. You don't get extra money just because you participate in 2 or 3 sports.
Incredible. Yeah, incredible. Sam says, looking back, does either one of you think that Iowa would have made the college football playoff with a 10-2 record? Only losses to ISU and Ohio State. Could agree our resume would have been better than SMU.
Probably would have been in.
You think they would have been in at 10-2 with those 2 losses?
Well, that's a long way from 8-4 when you lose to 2 teams that aren't even bowl eligible. Yeah.
Well, what would have been the teams that they would have been? So, SMU, right? And get this dumb ad off here. SMU and Bama would have been next at 9-3. Ole Miss would have been 9-3. Miami was 10-2. What would Miami have had?
Miami would have probably been over us, because we would have still been 10-2 with a little bit of a dubious schedule.
I don't know though, Don, because Miami didn't play Murderers Row either. They didn't play anybody. Florida State was horrible. That was supposed to be a marquee game. Their losses were to Georgia Tech and Syracuse. I don't know. That'd have been an interesting conversation between Iowa, Syracuse, or Iowa, Miami, and SMU. And ultimately, SMU got taken at 11-2, which I was fine with. They lost by 3 in the conference championship. I wonder though. I think SMU, because they played a tougher schedule than Miami did, is the reason I think they were in. But I think it would have been hard for Iowa to eke out a spot over SMU, especially since SMU played in their conference championship game.
We would have certainly been in the conversation.
We've been in the conversation 100%. We knew that going in. And Sam, he says, thanks for doing these shows, Corey and Coach P. Always enjoy tuning in. Thank you, Sam. Do appreciate you being here, sir. And good question about the playoff. Don, anything else that I'm missing here? We'll end the show here just about an hour and 15 minutes in. Kind of a light day, I guess, from people. They're getting prepped for, first of all, it's a cold day, and people are getting prepped for a lot of playoff football today and tomorrow. A lot of football that fans here in Iowa care about. So we'll let people get to their afternoons. But Don, anything else to add about the national title game or Iowa football? Anything we missed?
Let me throw out a couple other parameters that also have a really good high return on them. How about defensive sacks? Defensive sacks, 23 wins and 4 losses. That's 85%. That's compared to total offense, 87. So it's right there. The reason I bring it up in particular, some of these last 3 games, Ohio State is off the charts good with pass rush. I mean, one of these games, there were 8 sacks maybe that Ohio State had. So the reason I bring it up, you've heard me say before, in general, a sack is a drive killer. It's hard to convert on that series of downs if there's a sack in there on any down. And that holds true for this game too. So that's one that's awfully high, 85% win. And then right there behind it, not explosive plays, Corey, but super explosive plays. That's 30 yards or more. We know which team in particular is good at that. That'd be the ones from Columbus. That record is 21 wins and 4 losses, 84% win. And again, looking at the playoffs, how about this for crazy numbers? I don't have them in front of me, but in the 3 playoff games, Ohio State had, I believe it was a total of 8 super explosive plays. They had 6 in one game, 30 yards or more. Which game was it? It wasn't Texas. It was the one before. Who was that? Oh, I know it was. It was Oregon.
Right.
They had 6 super explosive. Most of them were in the first half. Even. How crazy was that?
Ohio State's favored by 8.5 in this one. They obviously have better, more explosive skill position talent. I think that's fair, Don. But we saw Texas. We've seen Ohio State fall prey to the slug it out game plan. I don't know how do you get sucked into that, Don? Because Michigan was able to do it, Texas was sort of able to do it, and it feels like that's the consensus out there. I know you talked about who wins the rushing battle, but you've got to make big plays if you're Ohio State. You've got to be able to. You can't let this field become condensed and smaller than it is. And to me, that's what Notre Dame has to do in order to not only win the rushing battle, but have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, let me give you I've got 3 priorities for each team. Priorities for Ohio State. Number 1, continue to spread the field. Lesson learned against Michigan. Do not try to slug it out with Notre Dame. That's not the strength of Ohio State. You got to spread the field. You got to make them defend from sideline to sideline. You got to give your skill guys a chance to do something in the open field. That's the strength of Ohio State. That's number 1, spread the field. Number 2, beat them with chunk plays. Beat them with home runs. In 3 playoff games, they've had 9 super explosive plays in those 3 games compared to the opponent's 2. 9-2 on home runs, if you will, against 3 quality teams. So that has everything to do with Ohio State's winning. Incidentally, they've had exactly the same number as red zone appearances as their opponent in those 3 games. In every game, they were tied on red zone appearances and pretty much even on red zone scoring success. The big difference, scoring outside the red zone. Advantage Ohio State. Big advantage. Number 3 for Ohio State, protect the ball. You don't have to win on turnovers, but you got to be at least even on turnovers. Even on turnovers for Ohio State, I would classify that as a win for them. Incidentally, one team is absolutely better at gaining turnovers on defense. That team is Notre Dame. Notre Dame, I believe, had 32 on the year compared to a team number for Ohio State. I can't remember if it's 19 or 15. Big difference.
Yep.
One of my complaints, if I'm an Ohio State fan, just watching them in general, is they don't seem to place a high priority on generating turnovers. I think they're feeling as well. We don't really need to. We're just outscoring it.
And they have not been. They've been good at protecting the ball on offense, right? However, there have been. The Michigan game was a bit of an anomaly, but when they start turning the ball over, that margin just grows because their defense isn't creating turnovers for themselves.
Right, that's true. Now let's look at priorities for Notre Dame. Number 1, win the turnover battle. Even is not good enough. Your mindset has to be, it's got to be at least +1. +1 only gets you so far. +2 obviously is better. +2, incidentally, in the Big Ten last season, 83% win if you're +2. If you're +3 in the Big Ten, it was 100% win. It's not realistic that Notre Dame can be +2 or +3, but they absolutely have to be at least +1. Win the turnover battle, limit OSU on explosive plays. That's obvious.
Yep.
And number 3, outrush the Buckeyes. Yep. You got to find a way to gain more yards. And let's not forget, Corey, that combination of outrushing your opponent and having more total offense. The record in those games, 24-1, 96% win. I'd say if you win both those in this game, you win the game. I don't care who you are.
And that's why Ohio State's such a heavy favorite. They've got explosive options all over the field. If you're talking about a guy like Jeremiah Smith, or how about the tandem at running back of Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson. Joe Winkler with Super Chat here. Wonderful Iowa insight from you two. Thank you, Joe. Do appreciate your support here, sir. And
let me bring up a point relating to that Ohio State team too, Corey. And it was in the Texas game. Remember this right before the half? Texas scored late, right? Remember what happened next with Ohio State? Ohio State had the ball with maybe 30 seconds left. They had maybe 75 yards to go. What did they do? They spread the field and they ran a really safe play that had the potential to be a home run.
Yeah.
75-yard screen pass. Remember that? That's what we need to think about doing. Rather than taking a knee at the end of the half, just spread people out and run a draw play. Run a screen. Something safe.
You say we, are you talking about Notre Dame or are you talking about Iowa?
Talking about Iowa.
Okay.
But I'm sure Notre Dame might have that same mentality.
They got to figure out a way to, because they're not going to be able, it's not going to look the same, right? Their explosive plays are not going to look the same as Ohio State's explosive plays. They don't have the horses that Ohio State has on the outside and a tailback. Is that fair?
Talking about Notre Dame?
Yeah, Notre Dame just does not.
Well, that one back he's a good home run hitter. He ran a 98-yard run in one of those games. Wasn't that Lund that did that?
Let me pull up his numbers.
I'm pretty sure it was. That's their number 1 back.
Yeah, Jeremiah Love. Riley Leonard's their number 2 back, or their number 2 rusher, I should say.
Yeah. Love's a little bit like Caleb Johnson. He does have potential for big plays.
Yeah, and he's got a good size. He's a big back.
Yeah. I don't know. I think one of the things that's changed, Corey, if I'm not mistaken, Notre Dame's starting left tackle missed the game. I think that's a recent injury, maybe even from the last game. And then the rest of the story, Ohio State had a corner that missed the second half of the last playoff game. I think just precautionary, and he's been given a full go too, I think. So in terms of injuries, it looks like Ohio State has a slight advantage there too.
But Jeremiah Love is the one guy. Like, they don't have – name another skill guy that makes your head spin.
Well, compared to Ohio State's receivers, Notre Dame's is pretty pedestrian compared to –
Yeah, very pedestrian.
And that's what makes Ohio State difficult. Can you imagine they won the game and yet they're phenom freshman receiver had 1 catch for 3 yards.
Right.
The message there is don't sleep on those other 2 because they also are outstanding players.
Yes, they
They've
are.
got 3 that can beat you. Any of those 3 can beat you.
Mark, appreciate your super sticker, sir. Thank you for being here as well. Thank you all for being here. Don, it's a season wrap for us. We've talked portal. We've talked the schedule. We've talked the upcoming season schedule, Mark Gronowski, all that. We hope to get some cool guests. We're working on that. And I know some people have requested some guests on the show. Don, I'm guessing this won't be, well, I know it won't be our last show together before 2025 season commences because we got spring ball, 2 months away? And we're going to have the open spring practice. And then, of course, as we get closer and closer to fall camp starting, the time goes by faster now than it used to for me, Don. I don't know, but you've been coaching the game for so long. I'm sure you approach the offseason totally from a different perspective. But
just wait until you hit your 70s, Corey. It'll really be moving fast on you.
I can wait. I will wait. I would tell you what, I will wait on that. So, Don, enjoy the Iowa women's basketball game tomorrow. I know the women need to get back on track just like the men do. And then, of course, on Monday evening, Ohio State, Notre Dame. And let's give a little plug to our good friend Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. He'll have live post-game coverage as he always does. And you can follow him at Mark Rogers, VOCFB on Twitter. And, of course, their official Twitter handle, their first official X handle is, what is their official X handle? I believe it's at the VOCFB. So you can search the voice of college football on X. Don, enjoy your weekend, sir. Stay warm. Colder weather than this is coming. These next 2 days are going to be brutal. So stay inside, watch them playoff football, watch them college football finish up on Monday night, and we'll talk to you next time.
Absolutely, Corey. I look forward to it.